Breaking Jim Jones' courtroom drama just took a nuclear turn. And baby, this ain't your average celebrity scandal. What if I told you the man who once repped loyalty louder than his ad-libs just got bodied in court by none other than his own brother-in-arms, Camron? Yeah, that Cam and the T. Scalding, we're talking secrets so dirty, even Love and Hip Hop wouldn't touch them without gloves. What was supposed to be a routine trial spiraled into an alt-out expose when Camron flipped the script and aired out Chrissy like last season's fur coat in July. Why was Chrissy really standing by Jim all these years? Was it love? Or was she the puppet master pulling strings while smiling for the cameras? Did Jim Jones know about the shady backdoor deals? Or was he just the clueless frontman for Chrissy's empire of secrets? And let's be real, how many more skeletons are waiting backstage, ready to moonwalk into the spotlight? This ain't just a courtroom case. It's a reality show, political thriller, and true crime docuseries all rolled into one. So grab your popcorn, because what Camron just unleashed might not only destroy Jim's legacy, it could end Chrissy's career for good. Let's get into it. They say loyalty in the hip-hop world is everything. But what happens when the one man who's been shouting family over everything from the rooftops finds out that the two closest people in his life might have been playing him like a fiddle the whole time? That's exactly the mess Jim Jones is tangled in right now. And trust me, it's uglier than a rap beef on Twitter at 3 a.m. What started as just another courtroom showdown quickly turned into a full-blown tabloid apocalypse when Camron, yes, that Camron Dipset legend, no filter king, and former bestie turned frenemy, decided to drop an atomic bomb right in the middle of testimony. While the public expected Jim to take the heat for some questionable financial moves and past shady dealings, no one expected Cam to grab the mic and flip the script on Chrissy Lampkin, Jim's longtime partner in crime and Redortawell. Apparently, more Raidan Baree. In front of a stunned courtroom packed with reporters, lawyers, fans, and enemies disguised as spectators, Cam came with receipts, and not the petty kind. According to him, Chrissy hasn't just been sitting pretty beside Jim for show, she's been working with powerful people behind the scenes. People with serious agendas. The kind of folks that don't just whisper in your ear, they control the whole room. Now, let's not pretend like Chrissy hasn't had her fair share of critics over the years. Ever since her days on reality TV, people have questioned her motives. Was she in it for the fame, the love, or the control? But Cam didn't just raise questions, he laid it all out, suggesting that Chrissy had built her own empire in the shadows. One that may have included backdoor real estate deals, untraceable cash flow, and even quiet partnerships with individuals who have federal agents breathing down their necks. And where was Jim in all this? Apparently, blissfully unaware, even worse, willfully blind. Cam painted him as the loyal soldier, too focused on keeping the brand alive to notice the snakes in his own garden. The courtroom buzzed as Cam detailed how Chrissy allegedly used Jim's name to gain access to certain circles, locked in hush-hush deals, and moved money through networks that would make Wall Street scammers blush. It wasn't just personal, it was criminal, according to Cam's claims. And the timing, impeccable. Just when Jim thought things couldn't get worse with the charges hanging over his head, the narrative turned and the spotlight shifted from his so-called criminal activity to the betrayal in his inner circle. And let's be honest, the internet went wild. Twitter timelines exploded. TikTok sleuths started analyzing old footage of Chrissy and Jim. Fans pulled up decade-old interviews, dissecting every glance, every awkward pause, every off comment from Chrissy that suddenly didn't feel so supportive anymore. Cam's revelation didn't just stain Chrissy's reputation, it cracked the image of their relationship in half. And what's worse, Cam wasn't done. He hinted oh so casually that there were still more names, more files, and more stories to come. According to him, Chrissy had been connected to certain figures in Jim's past that he thought he had long-cut ties with people who weren't just enemies of the brand, they were enemies of freedom. As the courtroom murmurs turned into gasps, Chrissy sat stone-faced, while Jim looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in slow motion. And honestly, who could blame him? The man thought he was in court to defend himself, not to learn that his queen might have been building a secret kingdom right under his throne. Meanwhile, the public was eating it up like Sunday gossip over brunch. Headlines screamed betrayal. YouTubers were already dropping 45-minute exposes with flashing red arrows and ominous music. And the real kicker, Camron looked like he was just getting started, smirking through it all like a man who had waited years for this moment. And maybe he had, 'cause let's not forget, this wasn't the first time Cam and Jim's relationship hit the rocks. There's been tension, interviews, sneak disses, awkward silences, but no one saw this level of betrayal brewing under the surface. And yet, here we are, watching it unfold live and in color. Now, let's be clear, Cam didn't say Chrissy was running a cartel or laundering billions, but he definitely painted a picture of a woman knee-deep in some dangerous chess moves. He spoke about alleged partnerships with developers who've been under investigation, backroom cash deals involving club promoters, and even claims of real estate flips using Jim's name but never seeing a dime go back into his accounts. Basically, Chrissy might have been using Jim as a brand while stacking her own. And Jim, he might have just been the mascot in her master plan. One source close to the case, anonymous, of course claimed that there were documents being reviewed that showed suspicious money trails tied back to businesses that Chrissy allegedly co-managed but never publicly claimed. Another leak hinted at burner phones, secret meetings, and hush payments to stay off the radar. And while all of this remains technically unproven in the court of public opinion, the verdict was already halfway delivered. People were stunned. Some felt sorry for Jim. Others clapped back, saying maybe he should have opened his eyes sooner. But the vibe was clear. Something shady had been brewing, and Cam just kicked the whole pot over. Still, that wasn't the most shocking part. What rattled everyone the most was that Cam suggested he had warned Jim before. That once upon a time, long before the courtroom and the microphones, he had told Jim that Chrissy might be mixing with the wrong crowd. And Jim, he shut him out. Ignored the warning, chose love war, maybe denial over the truth. And now here, he was center stage in a scandal so explosive. It had people questioning everything they thought they knew about one of hip-hop's most iconic couples. But just when you thought the chaos had peaked, Cam dropped one last hint before the court adjourned for the day. He said, "If y'all think that's the end of it, y'all don't know the half. This goes deeper than you think." And just like that, the courtroom buzzed again, and the judge slammed the gavel to call it a day. But for the culture, oh, it was just the beginning. It's the beginning. The courtroom hadn't even cooled down from Camron's initial revelation. And yet day two delivered an even more devastating blow, taking the scandal to a level no one was prepared for. As the gallery filled and the press scrambled to their TS, like, look at this. And we all know I've been exploring that. And we all know I've been exploring that path. And yet day two delivered an Eve lover end. Seats Camron took the stand once more, this time with a confidence that suggested he had only scratched the surface the day before. The tension was thick. Jim Jones sat in silence, his face unreadable, while Chrissy entered with the same composed demeanor that had people questioning whether this entire unraveling was something she had seen coming all along. Camron, however, wasn't interested in subtlety. He claimed that the so-called image of Chrissy as the loyal partner was nothing more than a carefully crafted narrative built to disguise something far more calculated. According to him, Chrissy had allegedly been using Jim's name, reputation, and access to brokers' secret business deals without his full knowledge. The centerpiece of his claim was a series of financial moves, real estate acquisitions, consulting deals, and private investments, all tied to shell companies that appeared legitimate, but, according to Camron's testimony, were traced back to anonymous entities that ultimately pointed toward Chrissy. And that wasn't the worst of it. Cam alleged that offshore accounts were involved. He described what he called a web of invisible banking that spanned beyond the country's borders, accounts registered in tax havens, linked to companies that had no real operations, only money movement, and whose image was used to sell. The legitimacy of these deals. Jim Jones, without naming names, Cam referenced communications between Chrissy and alleged financiers discussing how Jim's brand could be leveraged to build long-term equity. Emails, financial spreadsheets, and even wire instructions were mentioned in court. Though Cam stated these documents were in the possession of investigators and would eventually be made public. The room was silent, everyone listening as if each word was another hammer to the structure of Jim and Chrissy's empire. At that moment, the trial transformed from a celebrity courtroom drama into something much darker. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was about potential financial crime at a federal level. Media outlets immediately jumped on the story. Reporters outside the courtroom began speculating about money laundering, fraud, and whether federal agencies would soon be involved. Talk shows brought in legal analysts who explained how even without direct involvement, Jim could face serious legal consequences simply because his identity had been used in potentially fraudulent activities. Online, the reaction was intense. Clips of Cam's testimony spread across social media platforms like wildfire. Old interviews of Chrissy talking about building her brand with Jim became evidence in the court of public opinion. Fans who once supported the couple started turning, questioning whether their entire relationship had been built on illusion. Some called Jim a victim, manipulated by someone he trusted. Others accused him of being complicit, saying he had to know something wasn't right. But Cam wasn't finished. He began discussing incidents from the couple's past moments that were publicized on reality television. Arguments that were brushed off as entertainment. He now painted those moments as indicators of a deeper imbalance of power. In one instance, he referenced an argument that aired years ago where Chrissy pressured Jim to invest in a venture he appeared uncertain about. At the time, it seemed like a typical relationship disagreement. But Cam suggested it was just one of many instances where Chrissy directed financial decisions that ultimately benefited her more than him. He then detailed connections between some of the companies involved and individuals with past criminal investigations, some tied to racketeering, fraud, and even ties to known criminal enterprises, without directly accusing Chrissy of criminal behavior. Cam heavily implied that the company she kept and possibly collaborated with had a lot to answer for. Meanwhile, Jim remained silent, staring straight ahead as his past, his brand, and his future unraveled in front of him. And Chrissy, still composed, gave away nothing. No panic, no outbursts, just cold, controlled silence. Some saw it as strength. Others saw it as strategy. The internet was now flooded with theories. Online, sleuths began connecting dots between old real estate purchases, LLCs, business listings, and travel records. Amateur investigators claimed that several properties associated with Chrissy were tied to companies that shared mailing addresses with known shell corporations flagged by previous government investigations. Though these claims were speculative, the damage was done. Headlines began to shift focus from Jim to Chrissy, now the center of a growing scandal that blurred the lines between love, loyalty, and deception. It didn't take long before whispers of government involvement became louder. While nothing had been confirmed, multiple outlets reported that agencies were now reviewing the testimony from court and determining whether there was enough to begin a formal inquiry into Chrissy's business practices. Cam also hinted that more would come, stating plainly that this trial had only revealed part one of a much larger story. And if that's true, then what's still hidden might be even worse. Public reaction shifted from curiosity to full-blown shock. Supporters of Jim began questioning whether he had been nothing more than a pawn in a game designed to profit from his image. Meanwhile, others speculated about how long Chrissy had been planning this alleged double life. If the accusations were true, then the story of Jim and Chrissy was no longer a tragic love story yet, was a case study in manipulation, greed, and power. Cam's testimony concluded with a final statement that left the courtroom stunned. He said some people fall in love, some people fall into opportunity, and some people pretend they're doing both. With that, he stepped down, leaving behind a shaken courtroom and a narrative that would dominate headlines for weeks. But the question on everyone's mind wasn't just about guilt. It was about consequences. Would the authorities step in? Would charges be filed? Would Jim finally see the situation for what it was? Or would he continue to protect someone who might have spent years constructing an empire behind his back? And if so, at what cost? As the trial moved into its final phase, it became evident that the courtroom had turned into more than just a legal. Battleground Dick was now a public arena where reputations were being dismantled in real time. What started as an examination of Jim Jones' personal and financial affairs had spiraled into a full-scale exposure of everything surrounding him, especially the trust he had placed in those closest to him. The legal teams were working overtime, scrambling to respond to the ripple effects caused by Camron's explosive testimony. Meanwhile, speculation surrounding Chrissy's alleged business connections and financial activities began to take on a life of their own. Former collaborators, quiet for years, began to speak up, some anonymously, about strange meetings, unexplained investments, and ventures that suddenly disappeared without explanation. The public was no longer just reacting to gossip. They were piecing together a pattern. News outlets began publishing in-depth exposes, pulling financial records and property transfers into the spotlight. One investigative report pointed out that several of the properties tied to Chrissy had been purchased under shell companies registered to foreign nationals with no clear connection to her or Jim. Another source revealed that a past business partner had been under investigation for money laundering in a separate case several years prior. And although none of these details provided direct evidence of wrongdoing, they painted a picture that looked increasingly questionable. Legal analysts weighed in, stating that while there was still a long road between accusation and conviction, the circumstantial narrative was tightening. And if authorities decided to dig deeper, they would likely find even more inconsistencies buried in the books. Financial forensics specialists began combing through public data, noting irregularities in tax filings and business records that hinted at underreported income and backdated financial documentation. Behind the scenes, both Jim and Chrissy reportedly hired new legal counsel specialists in white-collar crime and federal investigations, suggesting they were preparing for more than just public fallout. Industry insiders speculated that quiet subpoenas were already being issued to banks and former associates. While official agencies declined to comment, it was clear from the silence alone that something larger was brewing. In the music industry, the consequences had already started. Brands that once aligned with Jim and Chrissy began to quietly remove promotional materials from websites and social channels. Some companies released vague statements about reevaluating partnerships. A major streaming platform paused discussions about a reality docuseries that was rumored to be in development with the couple. The entertainment world, once enchanted by their dynamic, was now keeping its distance. Meanwhile, fans were divided. Many took to social media to voice their shock and disappointment. Some sympathized with Jim, seeing him as a man betrayed not just by a partner but by the inner circle he trusted. Others questioned how someone with his experience in the industry could have been so unaware of what was happening under his own roof. The narrative around Chrissy became even more polarizing. Some saw her as an opportunist who had methodically used her position to build a financial web behind Jim's back. Others insisted the accusations were exaggerated, and that she was being unfairly painted as the villain simply for being a powerful woman in a high-stakes world. Regardless of where public opinion landed, one thing was clear: the couple's carefully curated image had collapsed. Old footage from their reality TV appearances was now being re-examined under a microscope. Every moment that once seemed romantic or empowering was being reinterpreted as potential manipulation or misdirection. Former castmates and behind-the-scenes producers hinted that there had always been tension and that the image of perfect loyalty was more branding than reality. One even suggested that several scenes had been reshot to downplay conflicts that might have hinted at deeper issues. And just when the dust seemed like it might settle, another wave hit. A former financial advisor, previously anonymous, stepped forward through a high-profile interview and confirmed that years ago he had warned Jim about unusual financial activity in one of their joint accounts. According to him, Jim dismissed the warning, saying Chrissy handled most of the money and that everything was under control. That statement alone cast doubt on Jim's ability to claim complete ignorance and opened the door to questions about willful blindness. Could it be that Jim knew more than he let on but chose not to ask questions to keep the peace? Or was he truly manipulated by someone who had orchestrated an entire alternate financial reality behind his back? Legal analysts argued that this kind of testimony, while not proof of criminal behavior, made it increasingly difficult for Jim to claim total innocence. And from a legal standpoint, perception matters. Prosecutors don't just build cases on documents, they build them on stories. And the story that was now emerging was filled with contradiction, negligence, and deep emotional betrayal. The emotional toll was beginning to show as well. Sources close to the couple claimed that Jim had been isolating himself, skipping meetings and delaying appearances. Chrissy, once an active social media presence, had gone silent. Public statements were replaced with legal threats, and both sides appeared to be preparing for the worst. Whether that meant prison time, financial ruin, or simply a complete collapse of their public identities remained to be seen. But what was already certain was that nothing would ever be the same. In the final days of the trial, as the media gathered, outside the courthouse, it was no longer just a legal proceeding, it was a cultural moment. A reminder that no empire, no matter how carefully constructed, is immune to collapse when secrets and egos are involved. The crowd waited not for verdicts, but for the next twist. Would Camron return with another revelation? Would prosecutors file formal charges? Would Jim finally speak out publicly? And if he did, would he defend Chrissy or distance himself? Completely. The world was watching, and the silence was louder than any outburst. By now, every piece of their story had become public domain, examined, ridiculed, empathized with, and debated. And while some still clung to hope that it could all be explained, the vast majority had made up their minds. They weren't witnessing a scandal, they were watching the end of an era. And with each passing day, the question became less about what had already happened and more about what was still waiting to be uncovered. So now the world knows. The courtroom has gone quiet, but the noise outside is only getting louder. Reputations are in pieces, alliances are fractured, and a legacy that once stood unshaken now stands on trial in the court of public opinion. What started as whispers behind closed doors has turned into a full-blown reckoning, and for Jim Jones and Chrissy, the consequences may just be beginning. The question is, what happens now? Will Jim speak out and finally reveal what he truly knew? Will Chrissy respond? Or will silence become her only defense? Are we watching a carefully crafted empire collapse? A calculated plan finally exposed to the light? One thing is certain, the fallout isn't over. Not by a long shot. The damage has been done, and whether this ends in criminal charges, public redemption, or complete isolation, the world will be watching every single step from here on out. So now it's your turn. What do you think really happened? Was this betrayal years in the making, or a desperate move exposed at the wrong time? Are Jim and Chrissy victims of each other, or architects of their own destruction? Let us know in the comments. And if this story left you speechless, hit the like button to keep this conversation alive. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter, because in the world of celebrity drama, The next twist always comes when you least expect it. The truth is out, the masks are off, and nothing will ever be the same again. Stay tuned, stay tuned.